Hi everyone, welcome to our panel. Hopefully you are well fed and ready to think and use all that energy for excellent questions which we will take from you later in the session. Now, geopolitical discussions of tech have recently largely focused on bipolar competition between the United States on one hand and China on the other. And as we've heard today and yesterday, this is a mistake, right? There are lots of other countries that are doing things somewhere in between that are taking a so-called more pragmatic approach to tech development and governments. And we need to know what they're doing. So this includes, but it's not limited to India, to the EU, and to so-called tech middle power countries like the UAE, Israel, or South Korea. Now, in our panel today, we will focus on these other powers, specifically on how the EU's engagement in tech regulation and development shapes its relationship with the United States, as well as what strategies different stakeholders can use to achieve their interests without further ramping up this bipolar global competition. Now, at the center of this discussion is what our hosts have called the, quote, innovation-regulation divide. Essentially, the hypothesis is Europe's regulatory power is being used to essentially compensate for a relative lack of digital power, right? Digital infrastructure power. And this is causing problems with platform companies in the United States and also with the American government. Now, there's plenty of evidence to support this hypothesis. You can think of last year where the EU criticized Meta for stopping the fact-checking of its social media posts. And Meta boss Mark Zuckerberg then appealed to Donald Trump to stop those Europeans from attacking American companies. You can also think of statements from European leaders where they have called for the Commission to fully enact EU legislation to ensure that European states and businesses feel the benefits of the regulation, right? Not just the limitations, but also the benefits that are supposedly coming from these. So in this context, I am delighted to moderate this very esteemed panel whose experience really spans the breadth of all the technologies that are at work in today's world. And they also, and I'm not commenting on any of our ages, have years of experience in global business, in global public policy, not just in the EU, but also around the world. As planned, we will have roughly a 35 minute internal panel discussion. And following that, we will be taking questions from the audience. So keep your thinking caps on, take some notes, and we'll look forward to hearing back from you later. You've been introduced, or do you want me to introduce you again? No, everybody knows who they are. Okay, these are you can read their affiliations in the panel. So I'm going to start sort of with a question about a general question, which is directed to you, Szabolcs. How will the EU's future efforts to regulate American tech impact transatlantic ties? And how does it affect the work that you're doing today?
Thank you. So I would mention firstly AI. It's an everyday task of ours. We are working on the implementation of the AI Act, and I'm the national delegate at the AI board. And we experience the opposition from the big tech companies, and our doors are basically open to them, and we are come to receiving the position papers, and we have to echo the sound of the market to the Commission. We experienced that the Commission established various forums, and they invite market players, but we still have to deepen it and take it more seriously, with very special regard to the SMEs also. Now your question was related to the big techs and to US companies. In many aspects and technologies, we do not have the alternatives, and they are providing platforms, business platforms also for our business sector and SMEs. But for them, it's much easier to comply with the rules. Our main job is to support the small and medium-sized companies in helping them understanding the very complex technology-related regulation on the one hand, and secondly, we are there at the implementation of the AI Act and trying to moderate the whole process. And we would like to avoid waking up in 2-3 years that we've created a monster with it. So this we have to be very serious in connection with this providing the feedback and echoing the market's sound.
Thank you. I forgot to tell the panelists, if you want to jump in, just raise your hand and you can jump in. Okay. So it's hard for the SMEs to comply in particular, right? You've got these sort of big tech corporations. You have to invite them because you need their services and you need their products. But at the same time, they're sort of perhaps having an easier time of dealing with these EU's complex regulations than is the case for small European countries on which the European Union has set its sights, right? This is Europe's path to success. I want to jump over to you, Paul and Maggie, for sort of a European versus a American answer to this question. Feel free to be as nationalist or non-nationalist as you like. Do you think that light tech regulations are a way forward, both for Europe in terms of developing its own capabilities and technological strengths, and also for the United States in finding bridges that make it sort of mutual gains a possibility when it comes to transatlantic relations?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for letting me go first, just to see how spicy we're going to make it. I'm Maggie Springer. I'm an investor into advanced technology capabilities. I also curate the Deep Tech Network under the ORF umbrella. So I come from the perspective of how do we look at borderless problems, global efforts, the demands and needs of nations, and how do we partner it with the advanced technology capabilities that we see emerging from so many different markets. So when I'm thinking about regulatory landscapes, one of my enduring concerns about investing into Europe are the ways in which we can collaborate, are the ways in which we can work together. Sometimes I think the regulatory effort serves to hinder the interoperability of companies between different nations, but also the end users, which often for us are different nations or major multinational corporations that already carry inherently a global footprint. So that is very key to our thinking in how we manage our investment dollars and place those investments. I would say the other thing that we see in Europe is sometimes a difference in terms of the patience of the capital relative to an American ecosystem, and also the speed of adoption. And to go ahead and do some of your work, Paul, for you, Americans are terrible at this. Our government is reprehensible in terms of the adoption cycle. It can take a half decade or more for us to bring new technologies into our defense sector and capabilities broadly. And when we're thinking about how do we use regulation to an advantage and how do we partner with other nations around the world, there must be some agreement on the way in which we adopt. And that does go back to regulation. Regulation doesn't have to mean red tape, but it cannot mean slowness. Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, Maggie, I don't think it will be as spicy because I concur. Now, my name is Paul Wolf. I'm from Rheinmetall, and Rheinmetall is a defense company, and that's probably one of the most heavily regulated industries. So I like the notion of a light touch on regulation very much. It's nothing that I have experienced for most of my career working in defense. Now, regulation in and of itself is nothing bad. It regulates how we work together across the Atlantic and across the world, really. Europe's power comes from the market, especially when we're looking at big tech and most of the innovation that's coming from that sector today. It's not a power that Europe really has, it's just access to the market. That's the only power that they really have. Now, I fully concur with you that this power is misused when you're using it either as a retaliation or as a hindrance, maybe protecting local industries, protecting local companies. And that ultimately does not foster innovation in Europe itself. It just creates burdens or maybe even retaliation against something else that you want to do. And I think as industry, as European industry, nobody profits from that. Maybe in the short term, you can limit access to markets, but in the long term, everyone suffers, including Europe. So a light touch would be much appreciated. How do we get to that light touch? I think it's collaboration. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's also outside pressure. Now, I don't know how that outside pressure might work in the tech industry. I can speak for the defense industry, and here the outside shock was the war in Ukraine. The Russian aggression really shocked European legislators, and all of a sudden, regulation that was sometimes even hindering us for years and decades, actually, became unfrozen. Dialogue was happening again. Investors were looking at the defense industry in a completely different light. And so this outside shock really pushed regulation to decrease a little bit, or at least to be harmonized to where it makes sense. Now, I'm not hoping that we always need wars or outside shocks to make that happen. Of course, it's better to convince, and that's why a strong collaboration across the Atlantic is so important.
Thank you, Paul. I think I liked both your responses because I think they very much show that from each perspective, there are both internal and external pressures that need to be balanced. And I think that perhaps the Europeans' way of going about it through regulation may be evolving, shall we say. So from that perspective, I'd like to talk a bit about evolution in general, right? So it's not just the regulations that are evolving, right? Certainly we need interoperability. We need to know which industries should be regulated differently and which ones with the lighter hand, which ones with the heavier hand. But we also have to recognize that our interests are also evolving, right? This is true both for firms that are active in the tech space, but also for countries that are increasingly seeing, as we've heard in earlier discussions today, politicization, I believe is what they call it, of tech, right? And of economic discussions as well. So my question is for Istvan and Shigman, give us a sort of industry, sort of government perspective. What technological tools does Europe have in its toolbox? What does it have right now that it can build on to sort of make those regulations more suitable to the kinds of strategic decisions that they'd like to achieve? And how might this evolve over the coming years? What can Europe create that will make it stronger from a political perspective?
Well, thank you, Megan, and thank you for inviting me. And I think it's an excellent idea. It's the first time I'm taking on a panel where you first start eating and then speaking, because I was in a boarding school, so I'm always hungry. So much better now speaking to you. So thank you for this excellent idea. Well, coming to your first, maybe two things about regulations. I'm coming from a German car company where everything is regulated. So regulation is for us the A and the Z. We are in the morning and in the evening. It's everything about regulations. But I think regulations can also be seen as something positive. If it's not regulated too much, it means the EU itself, or the European Union, regarding tech companies, is far beyond, of course, China and the US. We don't have big tech companies like the US have them. So I think regulation, and now I'm speaking, of course, as Hungarian and the European, can also be a tool as a strategic power to influence markets through regulation. So if we don't have the same big companies as the United States has, then the only power, of course, which are in our hands, and it's not just about the 460 million people living in the European Union, but regulations within the European Union has also influence on the whole world market, and this can be a geopolitical tool. So it's not just something bad. And I think also that regulations can be also, I don't want that you misunderstand me, but it can be something like a good of export. Because if you look at the big tech companies, I also have 4 children, so I know what the big tech companies are doing with the young generation. So if you are looking on big tech companies, no regulation, I think, is bad. I think ethical questions which might be raised if we are speaking about big tech companies. If the European Union is saying our efforts are going through ethical questions to make borders, to say these are the limits. How does technology and the human beings? How does technology and my children? How has it to be regulated? And then I think regulations are not bad, and it can be something. It can be a power and a tool in the hands of the European Union. Of course, if it comes to over-regulations, and if there is nothing behind it, then of course regulations are just a short-term political message. And then I'm referring to your question coming from the automotive industry. Regulations for me are the same as tariffs. Because if you look China, and if you look the European Union, if you look the United States, how does the European Union want to make their efforts, or how does they want to be on the same level as China? Not through technological achievements, not through working all day long, but they are saying it's much easier to give tariffs on cars coming from China. But we, as a big car manufacturing company, we are saying tariffs are always just, and you can say regulations, however, these are always just short-term perspectives. On long-term, on mid-term, regulations and tariffs are not helping, because it limits that we ourselves are developing ourselves. So in that sense, of course, regulations and tariffs are not the best way to be on the top, or to be in this triangle, European Union, China, US. For the automobile industry, US and China is hyper important. This means these are our future markets, not the European Union, but much more China and much more United States. And what United States is doing, they are also regulating their markets. Because if you look now in the car industry, they are saying whatever was produced in China, or they have this in mind, then you are not allowed to sell it. Hungarian cars manufactured in Hungary, exporting to US, having inside the car Chinese workforce, let's say. That means you cannot bring them to the China, and introducing huge taxes towards Mexico and Europe. That means that our cars, we cannot sell them for fair prices, just if we open technological firms, if we open capacities producing in United States. And looking in that sense, having regulations, of course, if something is back behind you, you have knowledge, you have companies doing regulations, that helps on the end. Maybe if we look on the perspective United States, that of course the big companies are investing in the United States and not in the European Union, not in Central Europe.
Okay, so regulation is a sort of a boost in one aspect, and also maybe a necessity in another, and a problem in a third. Okay, Istvan, over to you.
Exactly, and I'm István Serhegyi, I'm the CEO for Forage Space and Defense. I'm also coming from the defense sector, but also from the space. So I will bring some examples from the space industry more, because Paul is more an expert of the defense industry. So I let him to talk about it. But so regulation, if you have a global point of view, you want to be competitive and you want to be innovative. This is exactly the opposite what regulation means. Of course, you have to see a balance between the two, to be competitive and innovative and regulate these sectors. But you should be very, very careful with it. And now what I think we see in Europe, it's much more an over-regulated market than a competitive and innovative market. Some examples. So for example, for IG as a group, also working with telecommunication. Telecommunication is really not a competitive market right now in Europe. Why is that? Against, for example, the US, and I will bring always US examples. So In the US, how many telecommunication operators are there? 3, actually, 3 big ones for the whole US market. Here in Hungary, after we consolidated the telecommunication market, actually 4G did that, now we have 3 for 10 million people. How can you be competitive in this market? This is one example. Also about regulation. So Szabolcs told us the AI Act is coming, which is great. So in Europe, we usually do that. We regulate something, but we don't know. And after that, hopefully there will be some innovation. And that's not the proper way. So what actually the US does, innovate first and then regulate it if we understand what will happen. Actually, this is the same in the space industry. In the US, you have SpaceX, you have several huge companies and also very innovative startups and the whole ecosystem for space. And now they are regulating it. What will happen if we reach the moon, etc.? In Europe, first we regulate. And this is a disaster, I think. So it's not great. This cannot be the first answer to a question that we have to regulate something. So now we have an act for AI, but where are the AI companies in Europe? Where? All of them in the US. Again, I'm not talking about China and the others because I'm focusing on the transatlantic relations. Also very important that regulation, one point, but to be competitive and innovative, you need all the layers or the whole ecosystem for this. So not just the large enterprises, but you need the government, you need the SMEs, and you need the startups. But very important, you need a proper financial background and the financial ecosystem. You need all the venture capitalists, the private equities, and also the banks, etc., financial institutes, to finance the innovation in a proper way. If it is a startup, you need venture capitalists. If it's a large company, private equity or banks. And actually, what is really difficult here in Europe, for example, and again a good example how we moving slowly, is that in defense, for example, and Paul, I hope you can agree on that, it's really hard to finance the defense sector in Europe. In the US, it's pretty simple because they are doing it every day. In Europe, not. And now, when the defense sector is one of the key sectors in Europe, and we want to invest a lot, we do not have the solutions how to finance it. And this is a big problem. And now the EU is realizing that, okay, we need some changes in the regulation, but it will be years or at least months. We don't have months and years for that. And you cannot be, again, competitive and innovative if you don't have this financial background. And just one last example, how we do things in Europe and how the US does things in the space industry. So they have SpaceX. They have the cheapest reusable rocket to reach the space. And Europe, with the European Space Agency and with the European Union, they financed this Ariane 6 rocket, which is much more expensive than the SpaceX rockets like Falcon 9 and not reusable. So it's not competitive and not innovative. So we have to work on this from a European point of view, but together, of course, with the US, because they have lots of best practices how to move forward really fast and rapidly. So these are my points.
Okay, so a strong call for cooperation, but also one for enabling innovation, right? And making sure that you're making the most of the resources that you have. I'm glad you brought up the question of finances, and I'd like to jump back to Maggie on this one. What kinds of financial linkages do you think are supportive of a transatlantic relationship or the transatlantic sort of collaborations that were private and public going on? And do you see any sort of major changes on the horizons in terms of financial linkages that could encourage Europe to become more innovative rather than just more regulatory?
Paul, I loved your framing about outside pressure because I think that's going to be the catalytic force that's going to force the collaboration that we're all talking about. Certainly warfare counts in this space, but by way of my own background, I've focused a lot of my energy and effort on borderless problems. And this is everything from climate change, about which we don't seem to be that mobilized, to terrorism, to other things that go beyond the frameworks by which we're currently building. So when we're talking about financial linkages, I think the groups that get serious about those actions, those efforts and mandates, are going to be the ones that are able to raise the money, because they're going to be driven to action. I was in Ukraine 6-ish months ago, 7. The big takeaway I had there was a real lack of apology for the rate of innovation. It was spectacular to witness, because literally people were flying drones, and then we went back down into a basement. We were using 3D printers and parts and cobbling things together in a very MacGyver style. And then we went back out, and that rate of change, that feedback loop of not just a week, but hours, was so inspiring and so exciting to be a part of. That's what I would love to see. I know the regulation is mandatory. I just don't know how it should show up, because when it comes to even the ethical boundaries, my idea of a good life might look different from your idea of a good life. And that said, I'd like to thank the ethics of the panel for not making fun of the American when we're talking about tariffs and regulations at this particular moment. So thank you. But I think the linkages are going to be driven, if we're using capitalism, by the biggest market opportunities. And if Europe cannot generate innovation that is also partnered with the opportunity for scale, my dollars have to flow elsewhere, because I have a fidelity and obligation to my limited partners and investors. And to your point earlier, there are too many great nations that are doing incredible things. India is just amazing in terms of innovation, producing so many engineers. The UAE has had a really innovative model in terms of inviting joint ventures so that they can take advantage of all of the favorable SEPA relationships, trade relationships that they have globally. And I do think in some ways, what should be one of our closest collaborators is being left behind, because we cannot figure out how to agree on what innovation looks like.
Thank you, Maggie. Shabash, I'll go back to you. Do you feel like sort of trying to bolster Europe's tech sort of capabilities is a viable way of making progress on this, right? Maggie's just told us they don't know how to collaborate with Europe, because there's this money that's available, there's this tech knowledge that's available, but somehow the regulations are often in the way. Do you feel like there's anything that a governmental level, that a ministerial level can do to sort of facilitate those linkages and break that block?
I believe that we can really do a lot, but it's basically a question of mindset, of different mindset. What drives regulation? Fear drives regulation. We have a fear from each other and also ourselves. So what's technology? Technology, great tool. Technology is also a weapon, but technology is us. AI is us. AI is the best and the worst face of ours. Anything it learns, and then it will reach its target. So I believe that's a question of mindset, and I'm really sure that you're familiar with this LinkedIn or Facebook meme. Who wants change? Hands up, everyone, and who would like to change? And no hands up in the air. So yeah, we are saying it many times. We need honest and direct thought. It's very lengthy meetings and workshops and committees are great for blocking each other of going into conflicts and starting a huge conflict in Europe, but we are also blocking innovation. So I really believe that it derives from mindset. So there's no real unity, and exchanging the sovereign decision and transition from member states to an entity, to an organization, will not make it easier. So the answer of the institutions to do this transformation and weaken the member states and make as many decisions on their own as possible, I think it's not an answer, but we really should work on fighting this fear and being innovative again, because it's really a fear from our side, because really technology is us, and we cannot simply regulate technology itself. We can build walls around the people and the institutions as kind of protection.
I had a recent discussion with someone who said that technology is what makes life livable nowadays, which I didn't like at the time, but I think there's some truth in it, right? There's we're unhappy if we can't see our friends and family when we're away from them now, because of course we can, right? If we just have a cell phone, we can. So I think this is a very good point, that you have to remember that there's people behind regulations, and when you ask them to change, they don't always do it, right? Sometimes they're comfortable. They want to know that there is no risk and that the risks have been taken care of, and this of course can get in the way of innovation. I wondered then, Istvan, I'm going to ask you this question. I know that in the realm of space, there's a role for public actors and there's a role for private actors. And your company, from what I've read, is very focused on being a private actor active in space. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about what kinds of steps you think that could sort of take us towards a new transatlantic relationship, particularly when in the U.S. there's already sort of this public-private dynamic going on with SpaceX, which is an evolving topic, as we all know. So we'll see how that works.
Yeah, sure. So with 4IG Space and Defense, I think we are a good example how we see how to accelerate competitiveness and innovation in a country like Hungary. So, for example, in Hungary, we didn't have a privately owned space and defense integrator in the country. We have great SMEs. We have great joint ventures and strategic partnerships with international integrators, but we didn't have a Hungarian privately owned space and defense integrator. And now we hope that we can be that actor. And why we do this? Because, of course, we see a huge business opportunity here because of the environment of space and, of course, defense sectors. And we think that every nation and every mature space and defense industry needs a privately owned large system integrator, or we can say an integrator in that field, because it can, of course, lead the competitiveness and the innovation, because it's private, it's flexible, it's fast, etc. It can build B2B and B2G relations based on trust, very important. It is also important that if we have international partnerships, strategic partnerships, we will be there as a listed company, as a public company, and also very important that because of our strength, gravity, and financial background, we are able to integrate the whole Hungarian ecosystem. As I mentioned, we need the government, we need the SMEs, we need the international partners, also the startups, the education, etc. But we need someone to integrate this whole thing. And I'm sorry to say, but it cannot be the government, because the government has other priorities, of course, which is not led by business. We are led by business, and this is a huge thing, also, and huge difference, but also very important that the government has its own role in this whole ecosystem, of course, from a sovereignty, independency, and etc. Point of view. But that's how we want to accelerate the innovation here in Hungary. And also very important to mention, because you asked about the technology toolbox of Europe. So it's also important, because I was maybe a little bit harsh about Europe, the European ecosystem. We have technology in Europe. Just it is important to scale it up for an industrial technology and to be able to export it outside of Europe. Of course, from a defense point of view, we respect the NATO, so it is, of course, should be NATO under NATO regulation. But in every type of technology, we have technology. We have AI technology, but we need to scale it up. And again, from a financial background point of view, we need that the very important part from here in Europe to have a capital market. Because what usually happens is that a European company, which is, for example, an AI company, it's huge potential, great technology, etc. What usually does this company? Go to the US market and list it on the American stock exchange. And that's not good, because we don't have a European capital market. And I think this is, again, a very important step for Europe to have our joint capital market in the future, because it can accelerate innovation and competitiveness, and also involve the fundings for these companies, which should be privately owned, even in the region, in the CE region. And that's our job as for Aerospace and Defense.
Okay, so European coordinated market, European coordination amongst businesses so that they make advances. This sort of steals my thunder from my last question, which I was going to give to every panelist, and I didn't warn you about, which is, what do you see as necessary in the next 5 years? What is the thing that Europe has to do in the next 5 years to maintain the kinds of regulation that it wants to have, so to stay true to its values or to stay true to its purpose as a technological power, but also to push that innovation, right? To make sure that European companies scale up, that they in fact manage to sort of establish a competitive position that allows them not to disappear as India is super innovative and China is further scaling up its dominance, and the US is doing the same. What is the thing that the EU must do in the next 5 years? And I'm just going to start at this end and move down. Szabolcs.
Firstly, regulatory pause, and then see how the recent regulations can work, and have received very frequent feedback from the industry. I believe it's very interesting, and then trying to create clear guidance on the implementation of the regulation, and thirdly, stability regarding the regulation, and also the whole supporting ecosystem, because that kind of stability is super important in very innovative nations. I myself spent was 5 years in Israel, and the basic funding and support system around startups and scale-ups is still the same, existing for very many years. Of course, there are always new programs and initiatives, but there's a great stability, and they know what to expect for innovation. You have to have this stability, because you're running a very high risk, and there must be some points which you know that are cornerstones, which are stable in this super risky environment. All the dots, all the elements cannot be risky, then you will not start.
Thank you. Over to you, Chikmon.
Well, just if I can come very quickly back to, because you compare so much all your US with Europe, and it was always, we have to be like, and I think that Europe should not be like, and we should have our own ideas, regulations, because culturally, Europe, the European companies and the people who work in European companies are totally different to people and to companies in the United States, and even much more different to Chinese companies. So I think I was on a lot of discussions already, and it was always, yeah, Europe is far behind, and let's see how United States is doing. Yes, we are far behind, but I don't think that the best comparison is to do the same like the United States, because ethically, culturally, it works different, and we have 27 member states. The United States doesn't have this. The United States has one big government which can decide and regulate. We have 27 member states, plus I calculate also the 28th government is the Commission, which is not always in line with the other governments. So we have 28 governments. I think what would be the most important for the future, if we look the European Union or the Europe as in regard of competitiveness, is that we should, first of all, we shouldn't try to be the biggest ones in every field. Let's have 4 or 5 topics where we should really be in 5-6 years ahead of other countries, ahead maybe of United States and ahead of China. And what is very important that we should decide, and we should have a clear strategy, all for these companies, for the regulations and for the competitiveness, what should be in the hands, what should be done for the big regulations and for the big strategy, what should be done with support of the national states, but directly in Brussels with the European Commission, and what tools and what money and what capital and what regulations should help all this development, but through the member states. Because as I see now today, there is, I don't say a war, because I mean, we are all friends, they're all 27, 28 governments, but however, I don't see that we are pulling on the same string. So it's, I think, the most important and much more important to adopt cultures and things from other countries is to see what should be regulated on European level, because it's only healthy to regulate it there, and what should stay on member state level, and what should each government do for, if maybe possible, for financing and for capitalization, because here you also have huge differences. I'm not just talking about technological, but if you go to today in Hungary, if you have a startup company, even though the Hungarian banks are getting a lot of money from the European Commission for supporting startups, you know, and ideas in the first phase, not seed capital, not second, third phase, even though Hungarian banks are very weak in giving money to startups in the first phase. That means that on the end, what happens? You have a good idea, you have to pay a lot, you know, to protect, you know, to go to the authority to protect it. But after 4 or 5 years, this startup company doesn't have the money. So then there is coming a German, a French, or of course the United States company and buying it. And it's not anymore a Hungarian or a European invention. So this is really bad, very bad in Hungary, much more supported by the government, actually, you know, a startup, much more supported than by the private business, by banks, which should, and they are getting money from it, from the European Commission, a lot, but still they are not doing it. So I think this is the most important, to decide which level, where, who, and not just looking always United States, because we are culturally, historically, ethically, and mentally, how we work in a company, totally different.
Thank you very much. So we've got sort of stable regulations with clear guidance. We've got making a decision, right? Strategic decisions about where to go, with whom to go there, and at which level to regulate. Esteban, over to you. What would you say?
I think I talk too much. I don't want to spend much time, but just one sentence that I totally agree with you. I just try to be very provocative with my European fellows, you know, because after a lunch you need some shake up. Yes, and that's one thing. But beside the joke, I agree with you. So I'm not telling that we should be like the US. We can be even better than the US, I think. We just have to check the best practices, of course, what they have, and actually they have huge know-how and heritage, especially in the financial markets. So we have to see what we can adopt. But of course, we have a cultural background, we have our history, we should be proud of it. So that's totally in line what I think. Yes.
Thank you. Over to Paul.
I'll take a playbook from Istvan and start being a bit more provocative, but in every direction. So no worries. So on the one hand, what can Europe do? So I think they need to be reliability, and limited. Limited, yes. So I like the idea of a pause, but reliable, because certainty is a virtue in business. You need to be certain if you want to invest your money, not just short term, and that's maybe a bit of a jab at our friends across the Atlantic, because uncertainty hurts everyone, hurts the flow of capital, for sure. So that's number one. On the other hand, the EU needs to kickstart, yes, but then get out of the way. Get out of the way, let the market do its thing. It sounds like very neocon or like the old school, but yes, let the market do its thing. Create clear boundary conditions, but within those, let us do our thing. We know how to operate companies. We know where we see markets and we see opportunities, and we are willing to put money where it's needed, including in small businesses. As a large corporation, you sometimes find partners, you help those, but banks will be much more freely if they have a certain regulatory environment, that they know the market is not going to be blocked tomorrow because of some political decision or somebody woke up with a bad feeling in their stomach in the morning. And that includes Europe. That's not just a jab at the US. And then the last thing, we need to remember that technology is more than what we consider big tech today. So, of course, go after and have fun with Me Too. Me Too products can work. They're not bad business decision. If you find the right spot to jump in and you have a good idea, you can profit from all the knowledge that the others have sort of built for you. You can have a successful business with a Me Too product. But there's other technological trends out there. I liked your view on looking at problems that or topics that affect the entire world, climate change being one. Now, I'm not an expert on that, but there's many more industries and technology fields where Europe can still be a global leader. Maybe is today already, and focus on those instead of just focusing too much on this big tech idea.
And I think this is something that's very common to the development literature as well, that we talk about leapfrogging, right? You build on the successes of others as a very fast and innovative way for making progress, and it's been proven successful around the world. At the moment. All right, Maggie, final word, and I'm sorry, we are getting to your questions, so yeah, we're getting there.
I'll be quick. I can feel my popularity declining by the minute, so I'll wrap it up. But I'll start by saying, diversity is what drives great ideas. And if we don't preserve the difference of viewpoint and cultures and history, then we lose so much of the perspectives that drive great outcomes. So that is never what I would encourage us to do. When it comes to what should we all be doing, I think the question is, who do we want to be in 5 or 10 years? Who do we want to be? Who do you want to be as the EU? Who do I want to be as someone who curates a global public-private partnership? And who does the US want to be as investment dollars looking at opportunities abroad? I think a lot of that depends on change in terms of procurement, adoption, and how we approach scale, because the dollars, to your point about free markets, are going to flow where the opportunities to serve the investment are going to be best held. That doesn't mean those are the only dollars available, and doesn't mean that should be the only dollars available. And to the point about popularity, I'll just double down. The other thing that I think Europe is really considering and weighing is the bigger China question. China is breathtaking in its discipline, in its adoption, in its efficiency, in its leapfrogging through various mechanisms. And the EU right now, I think, is sitting between two big powers having an argument. And there is going to be a moment of decision, and it's going to be a hard one. But the sooner it's aligned, potentially the faster you can move forward.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you to the room for being so patient. I'm going to take, we have 10 minutes for questions, and we will go over by 5 minutes, so that's on me, not on you. But questions, I see one at the back, or two at the back, and one at the front. And then just collect your answers and keep them brief, please. So brief questions, brief answers, and we'll be good. And the lady in the red, I think I saw you first.
That's why I like to wear red. You can see me. Thanks so much to the panel. I'm based in Brussels, and there's the Brussels effect. Do you think that's truly dead? I mean, there's a saying, if you can't innovate, you regulate. Some of the things that you were talking about, I mean, there was an interview yesterday in the FT with Galloway, and he said that he had students who said that they had invented AI in Oxford, and that didn't take off because they just didn't have the pools of funds to promote it. So that kind of jives with what you're saying. But this means that there's a real risk aversion in regard to investments. And you're kind of poking a little bit around the boundaries of industrial policy. So I'm not clear what your position is on that, because you want the EU to help you, but then let you run free. So I'm not really clear what the message is there, because you want funds from the EU, but then to be free and to be unregulated. I'm just trying to clarify what this means. And then the gist of this whole panel was Silicon Valley versus Brussels. So it seems in some areas of policy making, there's some convergence between both sides of the Atlantic. So I'm wondering if you could maybe flesh that out a bit more. Thanks.
Okay, the gentleman next to her.
Thank you very much. Tristan Perry, Institute of World Politics. So all large language models and a lot of the AI tools available, they need data and data sets to work, but data is not like oil. It's not just sitting there in the ground waiting to be extracted. There are corporations and individuals who created this intellectual property and need in some way to be compensated for it. So how, from a regulatory framework, would you balance the respect for IPR with encouraging innovation and development of artificial intelligence? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last question up here up front.
Thank you very much. Stephen Nagy. I'm a visiting fellow at the Hungarian Institute for International Affairs and a professor at the International Christian University. So one pushback, I think we should be very clear, China is not efficient in terms of technology. And if you look at the Rhodium Group's most recent report, they throw a lot of money at stuff. And at the end of the day, if something works, it's great. It's not efficient. And I encourage you to look at the data on this, all right? It's really important. Where the US is efficient, it's very competitive, and the government stays out of business. But in two words came to my mind: urgency and speed of development. And when I was listening to all of you, and again, I'm thinking about AI innovation in particular, and most of the AI innovation is not coming out of Europe. It's coming out of the United States and North America. And they are producing the technologies that are shaping our economies, shaping how we solve problems, shaping how we produce the next technologies. And I feel no urgency in Europe to combat this. And you are going to, I wrote it here, you're going to trap yourself in a position where you have to use US technologies. And I'm wondering, where is the urgency to for that strategic autonomy that Europe has always wanted? You don't want to be trapped in the U.S. technology, even though it's probably the best right now. So, where are the initiatives coming out of Europe? And I see it at the innovation level, but I also see it in terms of the kind of investor environment that you want to create, so that you can create, national champions, or frankly, supranational champions. And this is the tension that I've heard today. Lots of talk about sovereignty, but let's be honest, Hungary's a small country. It's not going to be able to compete with the US and its ability to scale up, or the Chinese ability to scale up. So we have this tension. It's urgent, we need the speed of development, and we need to balance sovereignty and supranational cooperation.
All right, thank you very much. And just to do a little self-publicizing, Maggie and I are having a studio session this afternoon that will talk about some of those issues if you want to tune in. Okay, so I would suggest we just go down the row. Maggie, we'll start at your end and come back this way. As brief as possible, please.
Yep, I'll be really quick. Stephen, I want to address here is I was erring on the side of being polite. When I say efficiency for China, I mean their rate of adoption, the authoritarian nature of many of their decisioning capabilities is much, much faster than democratic nations. So that's a problem. They're also terribly efficient in use of adversarial capital and the ways in which they take and borrow other technologies upon which they build. So that is the efficiency to which I was referring.
Yes, I'll jump at the lady in red. And because it gives me the opportunity to clarify, I was not asking for EU funds. When I say kickstart, I meant more public-private partnerships, as we see here in Hungary. I think those can really help. EU funds are usually terribly distributed across the continent, subsidize industries that shouldn't be subsidized. And so get out of the way was the part I wanted to emphasize, really.
Follow up, let's not forget that the EU Horizon funds went to Huawei.
And about the US tech, so if we check the defense sector actually in Europe, now we are using usually, and most of the technology is coming from the US actually in the defense industry. That's not good. Of course, we have to work together with the US because we are NATO, but also we need our own technology, and that's what we are looking for. I think I can say it on behalf of Paul too, that the EU should finance the defense sector to innovative itself and to be competitive. And now we have this SAFE program. We will see how it will go. But again, if we got something from the EU, shouldn't be over-regulated. So again, if you do that, okay, we will give you €1 for this and that, and you should do this, and very administrative way and very bureaucratic way, etc. It won't be innovative, and you won't build competency and capabilities on that. So we don't need the fund exactly, but we need to be regulated on a way that we have a framework. We have to have European technology, and that's what actually the EU preparing to have more and more EU defense technology, which is great, and that's fine. And after that, let us do the business and not over-regulate this part of the defense sector.
Thank you. Over to you.
Very fast. Well, yeah, if it's coming to China, I have much more in mind. Of course, you have a lot of products and a lot of technologies which are coming, which they are investing, and then it's not the but. Just take an example what Chinese companies did through COVID. For example, all the car industry, they were closed. Everybody was at home doing nothing. Still home office and still doing nothing. On the other hand, in China, the companies, the car manufacturing companies, they brought in all their people, all the engineers. They vaccinated them, and they were living in the company. And they were trying totally new things and reshaping the whole company itself and the technology company. So, for example, if I'm speaking about China, I'm thinking much more how to work and what you think about to work. This is where we can learn a lot from Chinese, not what you have in Europe, where people already say they want to have salary for 5 days, but only working 4 days and 3 days and all this stuff. You cannot compete with Chinese or even with US companies. And very fast, the other thing, Brussels, with the lady in red, I'm always a little bit allergic when they are saying you want to have Brussels money. Brussels doesn't have own money. It's always our tax money, which is in Brussels. And that's why I'm saying that we have to decide. And then I'm totally in alliance with you, because I was a Secretary of State for EU funds here in Hungary. That, of course, we got a lot of money from the EU, but on the hand, that I gave money, for example, and that means the Hungarian state, of course, from taxpayers. I had to sign, 1,000 papers to give it to a company, and then 1,000 numbers, and then if one number was not good, I had to take them. I had to give penalty to the company, and so on and so on. So it's exactly what you are saying, that we are getting a lot of money, we have money, but there is no strategy behind, and it's really like we don't let the private companies play with the money what we are giving them, which are coming, and this is really bad, and this is in the US much better. You give the money, you are trying, and if it's not going, then okay, it's away. It's tax money, it's okay, but however, yeah.
Okay, on that depressing note, the last word goes to you, Szabolcs.
Yeah, there's a need for dedicated funding programs and support actions in all TRL levels. It happens quite frequently that in times there are great programs supporting ideas and then no support during the Death Valley. So we experience it a lot, and it's killing the business. So there's no continuity and no real strategy behind it, which is really a problem. So all TRL levels have to be backed up with any kind of support action.
All right, well, let me say thank you to our panelists for your open and interesting contributions. Thank you to all of you for a nice lunch conversation. I wish you all the best in the rest of the panel, and hopefully we'll meet you soon.